You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Homefield Apparel. And welcome, Hoosier fans, to this week's edition of Assembly Call Radio, where each week we discuss the most important topics in the world of Indiana basketball. This is our 290th edition of Assembly Call Radio, and it is our 944th episode overall of the Assembly Call, recorded on the evening of May 11th, 2023. I am your host, Jared Morris. And let's begin this edition of the Assembly Call how we begin every edition of the Assembly Call, and that is with our Hoosier Proud banner moment.
And Indiana is the national champion.
When it comes down, Indiana will be champion.
Smart takes the shot.
The Hoosiers have won the national championship.
This week's banner moment occurred on Wednesday at 11:15 a.m. Central Time. That is when Andrew Slater tweeted out the news that five-star McDonald's All-American wing Mackenzie Mgbako will make his college announcement on Friday. Mgbako, who originally committed to Duke, is choosing between Indiana and Kansas. And given just how methodical and quiet this recruitment has been, it's kind of difficult to assess whether one school actually has a big leg up on the other right now. This seems like one of those rare recruitments where we really don't know where he's going on the eve of his announcement. Okay, great. So what makes the simple announcement of his announcement a banner moment? Well, first off, it's the offseason. Not a lot to choose from. But it's also important to recognize the importance of Indiana simply getting this far in the recruitment. Because whether Mackenzie chooses Indiana or Kansas tomorrow, this recruitment has already been a success for IU. How? Because as fans, we're much better off assessing the process that Mike Woodson and his staff are following rather than simply the results. And while Mike Woodson has done a pretty good job getting and keeping talent in Bloomington during his first two seasons, the reality is that if we want to compete with the Kansases, the Dukes, and even the Michigan States of the college basketball world, we have to start being in more of these high-profile recruiting battles until the end, sometimes the bitter end when it doesn't go our way. And here we are. Without a prior relationship to the player and having to compete against the legend of Rick Pitino and the deep pockets of Louisville, Indiana found a way to squeeze into the Final Two for a highly regarded prospect. This needs to be the norm moving forward, rather than the exception, for transfer portal players, but especially for high school recruits. Indiana simply has to start bringing in more top 80 level players on a year-in, year-out basis if we want to compete with the nation's best on a year-in, year-out basis. The groundwork that has been laid with the 2024 and 2025 recruiting classes suggests that Indiana's process here is smart, but it can't just be Zoom calls and official visits. We have to be there with a chance in the end. That's where Indiana finds itself with Mackenzie Mgbako as his decision looms, and it needs to become a much more regular occurrence moving forward. All right, now let me introduce my co-host this week. First off, to my bottom left.
The best of you sports coaching, you know that we got 'em. When it comes to analytic trends, you know he can spot 'em. For first class bracketology, if you want the top, you gotta go bottoms. If you want the top, you gotta go bottoms. If you want,
we want the top,
you gotta go
so we're going to go bottoms. Andy, what's your bottoms line on the last week in Indiana basketball?
I mean, nothing too concrete to go on here this week, except some of the schedule news that started to trickle out, which I know we'll talk a little bit about later. It seems like in general, scheduling some incrementally better teams than what we've seen in the past so far. Still got a few spots to fill there, so maybe those will be filled with some of the same lower level teams that we've seen in the last couple of years. But seems like they're doing a good job of filling things out, so it gives you a little bit more to another piece of the puzzle to look together. But obviously, as you said, the big news is the impending announcement of Mgbako would obviously be a huge piece of filling in what IU really needs when you sit back and look at this roster, and will lead to a lot of questions if they don't get him. And I know that we've got intend to talk about that, kind of what would be next if he wouldn't come, and some of those things. So that's really the biggest piece of news from an IU basketball perspective. Is that, and we'll find out. Luckily tomorrow won't have to wait too much longer, even though to your point, it doesn't seem like there's anything too clear cut out there right now that really pushes things one way or the other. So, which is kind of a rarity these days, as you said. So I guess maybe there still are surprises to be had out there in the world.
Let's hope. All right, and to my right.
He remembers the days when a movie cost $1. Heaven help you if you ever decide to pop your collar. Play hard, but remember, fake hustle is a crime. He's the coach and it's Tonsoni time.
He is the coach. It's Tonsoni time. What is on your mind tonight?
Just good to be here with everyone. I'll second Andy. The scheduling pieces that are popping out seem to be interesting and kind of I can't wait to get the whole package to where you're seeing, where they were rated last year and going forward. Andy and I, from a bracketology perspective, it's starting out to look, even the games you should win looks a little bit more competitive. Florida, Gulf Coast, Harvard, schools like that. So that's been something I've been watching. Obviously, the recruitment is huge. If it goes Indiana's way, it's just a huge plus for the Hoosiers. And if not, I think your banner moment is where we need to be. But we'll all be disappointed a little bit. But when he opens up a couple weeks ago or whatever, and it's down to the last two. Recruiting is tough, and that's we have to understand that we're getting in with these guys. We just need to find the reason to close. And unfortunately, we've lost out for years, going back to the previous regime. A lot of guys had us in their final list of 3 and 4. It just seems that for whatever reason, we haven't been able to close on some of these huge names on a regular basis. Obviously, we got Hood Schifino. And those a couple here recently, but we need a lot of players. So that's going to be interesting to see what direction of the conversation will be after tomorrow's decision.
Yes, it will. And ladies and gentlemen, coming to us from San Diego and sporting his brand new clock from the great Richie Carter there over your left shoulder. It's looking beautiful.
Analyzing players, finding every wrinkle. He hasn't ever hosted, never lifted a finger. He's got all the
Well, let me quickly add just one thing about this.
Dude just interrupted his own jingle.
All right, Ryan. I saw you tweet earlier that the Padres are just dreadful with runners in scoring position. So why don't you rant about that for a couple minutes here?
I'm still repping them, though. Big series this weekend against the Dodgers. Let's get it done, boys. Let's turn it around. Juan Soto's heating up. I feel a break coming. What I'll say is, Jared, you're right. They have to be in the finals of these big recruitments, and they have to do that more often. It's Indiana, where we should expect certain things. But a vibe I'm getting from a lot of people is the program feels a little hamstrung when it does get into those battles, because there's just things about these other programs that Indiana doesn't have. And one thing that happened, and I talked to a lot of people from within the Indiana athletic department and around the program, when they went to Kansas this year, they were shocked at the gulf between the facilities Kansas had and Indiana, and the way that they treated basketball and the way that Indiana does. I mean, one guy texted me, just said they have a personalized intro, like a specific intro for every single game, and it's different for every single game. And they do this, and they have all these light shows and all of this stuff. They have a massive Hall of Fame when you walk in. So when you walk into the arena, you are surrounded by the history. And then their practice facilities and even the gym, the arena is nicer and all of this. That's a consistent theme when Indiana comes up against these other big schools. And quite frankly, Indiana needs to decide if it wants to get serious about college basketball in that way. Do you want to invest in the program the way other teams? You can only ride on the fact that you are Indiana for so long. And because, quite frankly, the way we think of Indiana is not the way the rest of the world thinks of Indiana anymore. Because it's been so long since this program has been dominant. So you have to make up for it in other ways, and they need to start investing in the program. Whether it's we've talked about a new arena years and years for whatever. Okay, that's one thing. But the practice facilities, the investment in infrastructure around certain things, the multimedia stuff, all of that needs to go to a top level program. If you're fine competing for a Big Ten title once every 4 to 5 years, competing for a Sweet 16 berth once every 4 or 5 years, then keep it the way it is. But if you want to get these top players consistently, the name on the jersey only goes so far. And so there needs to be more of an investment in this program if they want to keep winning. And that's not to say they're going to lose this recruitment, but in general, the feeling around when he says Kansas is his other finalist is because of those reasons. So hopefully we wind up getting good news tomorrow. But even if you do, I think there needs to be a bigger investment in this program from this university.
Okay. Well, here's what we have in store this week. We'll spend the rest of segment 1 talking about some Hoosier headlines. We got some interesting schedule news this week, so we'll talk about that. Segment 2, we are going to dive into the Mackenzie Mgbako recruitment, kind of with our decision primer, kind of how we're feeling about it, what this means, all the different kind of tentacles that it has. And we got some good questions from you all, so we will answer those as well. And then we'll answer more questions in the mailbag. All of that coming this week on Assembly Call Radio. But first, let's talk about our presenting sponsor.
Home field apparel, wear one for the team.
Yep, this edition of Assembly Call Radio, just like all shows on the Back Home Network, presented by our friends at Home Field Apparel, where they have the largest collection of vintage IU apparel that you will find anywhere, and one of, if not the largest collections of vintage college apparel generally that you will find anywhere. Constantly releasing new schools, constantly refreshing the ones that they already have. I saw, this week they did, a little bit of a Big Ten West thing, doing refreshes for Wisconsin and Iowa and Minnesota. So, if you happen to have fans of those teams in your life, go to homefieldapparel.com, pick yourself out 6, 7, 15 IU items because you're going to need them all. And then you can go buy stuff for other people, too. It makes great gifts, whether for birthdays or whatever it is. But the great thing about Home Field Apparel, and the reason why everybody loves it, is because the material, so comfortable. It lasts through many washings. You can get whatever someone needs, whether it's a T-shirt, a crew neck, a hoodie, a hat, a jacket. They've got everything. And the logos are just interesting, and they have cool stories behind them, and they're unique, and you're just not going to find them anywhere else. And so Home Field Apparel came up through the Kelley School of Business. Great company. We love working with them, and we hope that you will check them out, too, and buy their stuff. You can go to homefieldapparel.com, use our promo code HOME to get 15% off your entire first order. That's promo code HOME for 15% off. Once again, the website, homefieldapparel.com. Wear one for the team. All right, gentlemen, let's dive into some Hoosier headlines. And we'll just start with, a couple quickies. Anthony Walker, it is official. He is a Hoosier, signed the paperwork this week. I saw he did an interview on Hoosier Hysterics. I've not had a chance to listen to it yet. But again, by all accounts, the type of guy that we were talking about, a guy who's been around, can provide some of that leadership, provide some of that athleticism, seems very comfortable in a reserve role. So I think, he can pay some good dividends for an Indiana team that is losing a lot of experience and production coach. And I continue to think about that when it comes to a guy like Anthony Walker. It really does seem like this staff was committed to finding some experienced guys to help bridge that gap of all the experience that is leaving. And so again, I think for anybody who may have misgivings about Anthony just by looking at his stats, I do think it's important with this player in particular to look beyond that and look to some of the other intangible things that I think the staff was really looking to add.
Yeah, I said it when we talked on the day he committed. I just think you got to have pieces on a roster, and you can't have 8 guys that are going to go play 40 minutes and score 20 points and be the top of every transfer list. If you do, maybe you get a guy that has better statistics, but there's still going to be the type of guy that says, I want to come and play at Indiana. I want to play in Assembly Hall. I want to be part of a program that has meant something to the community. And that's what this guy is, with the experience of playing on a team that's advanced in the tournament. And so that's the kind of guy you need to fill out a roster. And when you had so many open spots, you got a couple of those as your backup 4 and 5. Those are good guys to get. We're just missing those other 2, those wings, then that scorer and that shooter that really would keep Indiana going and prevent a step backwards. That's what we're all anxious for, and that's where the young man tomorrow would really fill a need. And so we're all anxious to get to that part. But yes, Walker's going to be a guy that we're going to appreciate for the role that he is going to find on this team, and it'll be much needed.
The transfer portal deadline is tonight at 11:59 for players who want to be immediately eligible next year and who are not grad transfers. They have to put their name in the transfer portal tonight. It doesn't mean that you will see all of the names tonight. Guys, I think, can email their intention to go in the transfer portal. As long as it's in before midnight, they can do it. But just so that you know, and you can kind of watch, expect a few more names to trickle out over the next couple of days. But the deadline is tonight. So, we've spent a lot of time on this show since the end of the season talking about we still have time. Okay, now time is starting to run out a little bit, and so we've got to complete this roster, but still some good options there to do it. Guys, let's talk about the schedule real quick because we did get some interesting schedule news this week. A couple new games that we found out about. Indiana will be playing Wright State on November 16th. They have been a pretty good program, have dipped the last couple of years. This year they were 197 in Ken Palm, which is the lowest they've been in a while. We know that Indiana was going to play Harvard. That game is now going to be in Indianapolis on November 23rd, so another Indy game. They were 158 in Ken Palm. Of course, that was with Chris Ledlam. They don't have him now, so we'll see how good they are. And then Indiana will open with Florida Gulf Coast on November 7th. Coached by Pat Chambers, a name that many will recall from his time at Penn State. They went 17-15 and were number 185 in Ken Palm last season. And so, Andy, when you look at this, obviously the through line here is a whole bunch of teams that were in the top 200 in Ken Palm. And, so you add that to the other games that we know about, which is home against Kansas, against Auburn and Atlanta, and then the Empire Classic where Indiana will play two of Texas, UConn, or Louisville. You're starting to see how the schedule is shaping up. There's still room for, 3, 4, 5 cupcakes, depending on how many Indiana wants to add. But right now, the schedule that we have, this looks like a very fair but challenging non-conference schedule, I would say.
Yeah, I think so. You look at the history of a lot of these teams. Florida Gulf Coast, they had a couple rough years not after Andy Enfield left. They were really able to keep it up and be perennially top 200 at Ken Palm. Dipped a little bit, but then Chambers had him back up there. Wright State, one of their worst years was a year ago, but Scott Nagy's been there a while. They've had good success under him, have been in the top 200 every single year under him, and even were there most years prior to that. And Harvard, they rated relatively well last year, but they were still only 5-9 in the Ivy League. So even with that, they rated 158th. Amicus kept them, again, with very few exceptions in the top 200. So again, for these teams, it feels like you're seeing less and less of the absolute dregs of college basketball. And I think somebody sent in a question about this, which we can get to later. Ultimately, these are not going to be, quad one wins really under any scenario, unless one of these teams way overachieves what you would expect them to. They may mostly end up in quad four, but it is better when you start looking at average of the teams that you beat and different things like that. It is, that is important. And the other common thread between these is they're not the absolute worst of the worst from a league perspective. So, the league isn't going to weigh them down. I think each of their leagues ranked, between like 15th and 21st or 22nd last year on Ken Palm. You're not getting down into playing a bunch of teams, at least so far, from leagues that rank, 27, 28, 29th, in that range where for those teams to really be beneficial to you, you need so many things to go right. And you saw last year, they struck one with Kennesaw State. They ended up being a lot better than people thought. It wasn't a great win, but it was further up the chain from a quadrant perspective than some of the others. And so you kind of hope maybe one of these games falls into that. And similar to what they did with Miami of Ohio from a year ago, you get a neutral court game that should be a win against Harvard. Again, based on where the cutoffs are, maybe that gets to be a quad 3, depending upon, how Harvard shakes out. But you do give yourself, some of those road and neutral court games matter to an extent. So being able to beat somebody else away from home is something there. And I think from a fan's perspective, gives people a chance in Indy to maybe see them a bit more and things like that. So I think a lot of positives so far. Now they come and fill out the rest of the schedule with, two teams from the SWAC and one from the Southland, then maybe I'll have a different maybe I'll have a different opinion. But
Chicago
for now,
State and Fairleigh Dickinson.
yeah, well, then nobody. Just bringing in Fairleigh Dickinson just so
Just
people
trying to think of the
give them
worst possible teams I can think of.
Has
Yeah,
Fairleigh
you could just-
Dickinson ever played a team from Indiana? Can you refresh me?
Yeah,
might
just
have.
bring them in just so you can give them a standing ovation. I feel like would be the move. But anyway,
That's true.
so
That would
let's-
be okay. That would be hilarious if we scheduled Fairleigh Dickinson this season.
just-
That would be such a great troll move by Mike Woodson. Oh my god, I would love it.
That would be pretty amazing.
They,
But,
they come out and they get a standing ovation. Everybody's there in their Fairleigh Dickinson home field apparel shirts. Oh, I almost kind of want that to happen.
what a time to be alive! All right.
Coach, you have anything on the schedule and how it impacts bracketology?
It's just kind of interesting. Game 1 against Florida Gulf Coast. I think in Game 1 last year they traveled out to Southern Cal and beat Southern Cal, and they were above 500. And Pat Chambers kind of knows a little
Southern
bit
Cal's
about
soft.
the Big Ten, but it's still one of those teams like we had Indiana State in to start a few years back and got smoked. These are games that you want to schedule, but you've got to be ready to play them. It's not, and so I was a little surprised. My point is, I was a little surprised that they didn't have a softer start with bringing all these players together. I don't think it's something to be afraid of, but yet it is going to be a little bit tougher of an opener than sometimes you would think with a team that is going to be playing its first game together in Assembly Hall. And then, Harvard coming in. I like you can't play 11 Power 6 schools. I think you could, but I think that would be a lot to ask. But the other parts of the schedule can be a little bit tougher than what they have, and I think Wright State, Harvard, those announcements so far, it's a good sign that Coach Woodson knows that scheduling is important, and if you're going to be a good program, you can't really water it down with a lot of those lower level schools. So I just think it's a good sign.
A couple other things. Our friends at Hoosiers for Good are hosting the annual event on May 31st at Huber's Winery. It's going to be $50 per person. It is going to support NIL as well as Roche Inc. So you can go there. There's also a golf outing that is attached to that as well. So if you go to the Hoosiers for Good website, you can learn more about that. And then the last thing I want to talk about, Ryan, is, today is the deadline for the transfer portal. The next deadline to watch out for is when players have to make their NBA decisions, which is June 1st, I believe. June 1st, May 31st. I don't know exactly when it is, but it's right around there because there are obviously a lot of people who have declared for the draft but may not necessarily stay in it. Some of those players may be the 11 from the Big Ten that are participating in the Combine. So you've got Trace and Jalen are there, along with Kobe Buffkin, Zach Edey, Coleman Hawkins, Jet Howard, Seth Lundy, Chris Murray, Terrence Shannon, Bryce Sensabaugh, and Jalen Pickett. Some of those guys still have eligibility left, like Zach Edey, who I think a lot of people think will be coming back. Guys like Jet Howard and Kobe Buffkin, who do not have eligibility. I think most people expect that they will be gone. But it bears watching. Ryan, any of these names particularly interesting to you? Anything you're going to be watching out for here over the next month as it relates to stay or go decisions?
We've talked about it before, but I think Coleman Hawkins is interesting. That's really going to depend. Whether he stays in or goes is just going to depend on how he works out, quite frankly. I think how he plays in the scrimmage portion against other potential NBA guys, because that guy has as much talent as anybody. But I think several times this year, Andy texted me, like we texted back and forth, just like I don't know if there's a bigger gulf between talent and performance anywhere in the nation. Like guy actually coming through and living up to it. And you saw flashes of it. So he's interesting to me. I think Chris Murray is also interesting. He's going to have to show that he can consistently knock down NBA range 3-pointers, I think, to stay in. I think he will stay in. I think that's a done deal. But where he goes will depend on his shooting ability. And then, Trace and Jalen, they're both going to stay in. There's no question about that. But they both have to show some things to maintain what would be a first round, or for Jalen to maintain his lottery status and for Trace to manage to sneak into the first round. I think they both
These
need
NBA
to be able.
playoffs have been good for Trace.
Yeah,
I think.
but he also has to show that he can do things away from the basket, not necessarily knock down jumpers, but play away from the basket to some degree, because he's going to wind up guarding away from the basket in the NBA as well. And Jalen's just got to prove he's a consistent 3-point shooter. I think that you saw him go off in some games this year and hit a lot of threes, and then you saw him miss a lot in some games. So I think that he's just got to, I think that's the only thing scouts are worried about is the consistency in that jumper. Because the NBA, like, college to some degree, doesn't love long twos, and that's where he lived this year, was making long twos. Now, if you make them, it's fine, but, he's going to get, people are going to try and drill him into 4 steps back and make sure that's a 3 before. Well,
scoring at the rim and getting fouled is the other thing for him too. That I think
that's
has
the
people
big
questioning his offensive. How complete
Absolutely.
of a package does he have?
Absolutely. But I think that a lot of people think he'll grow into that, and given his size and his ability to sort of get by guys. But so those two are things to watch for those guys. And athletically, how does Trace test? I think is going to be interesting, because he's going to have to show, a bit of a vertical and some other things, because he's going to be playing against bigger guys, quicker guys if he's on the perimeter, all of that stuff. So those tests will be interesting. But I think Hawkins and Murray are two that are interesting to watch for me.
Yeah, the Hawkins thing is interesting. I think just some of his on-court decision-making and things like that are like, shows the flashes, but then there's other times it's like, what in the hell is this guy doing? So be interested to see which version of him shows up at the combine, and if in that setting maybe he plays differently. The guy that I'm intrigued by, only because I don't know how he fits in the NBA, but was entertaining to watch, is Jalen Pickett. How does booty ball fit into the NBA is the real question. But yeah, I mean, a guy who really didn't shoot it all that well from the outside, has a unique game that I thought Shrewsbury did a great job of taking full advantage of, and was an incredibly impactful player. What does he, or what could he look like in that setting? I think is kind of fascinating, because it doesn't seem to translate on the surface, but again, is that a function of that's how he was asked to play because that was the best way for their team, and how might he be able to evolve and do something differently? Just as a player that I did not enjoy watching play against IU, but generally enjoyed, kind of how he played and things like that over the last couple of years at Penn State. So kind of one of the more intriguing ones of that group, just because there doesn't appear to be as clear a path to what he can do. I mean, even Lundy, who is a far less impactful player at Penn State, but he's such a good shooter that it's like, okay, I can see it. And Pickett's the one where I just don't know what that looks like, but will be intriguing to see.
I'm with you. I don't know what it'll look like, but there's something about Jalen Pickett that I think I wouldn't bet against him. There's some guys, it's like, okay, he's not this guy, but it's like Jalen Brunson, right? Everybody kind of doubted Jalen Brunson. He goes into the second round, and then he's just productive, and he's turned into a star. And I don't think Pickett will do that, but there's just some guys that kind of understand how to play basketball and have that mentality. And I kind of feel like Pickett has that. We'll see. Does he have the skills to back it up? And, can he play the way he wants to play? But it'll certainly be interesting to watch. Anything else, guys? Any other headlines catch your mind? Any other final thoughts about any of these other stories before we jump in and start talking about the little recruitment that we're going to find out about tomorrow? No? Okay. Excellent. Well, with that said, it is time to talk about Mackenzie Mgbako. He is going to decide his college choice tomorrow, and there are reasons to believe he's going to go to Kansas, and there are reasons to believe he's going to go to Indiana. We'll talk about him. Stick with us here on the Assembly Call. All right. Well, hello, everybody. Nice to see so many people here live. This might be the biggest live turnout we've ever had for an off-season show. I'm not sure we've ever broken the 300 mark. So that is very exciting to see. So thank you, everybody. Give yourselves a round of applause for being here. We appreciate it.
There's news on the horizon, so they had to get in here.
Plus
they're just hoping for facial expressions from you, Jared.
Yeah.
That's what they're.
Right.
They're not even
hang out
listening.
long enough. Will you get a text that you're unable to poker
Maybe
face
I'll just
during the-
maybe I'll just
and they
act
just
like I
zoomed in on your
get
face.
news. Ooh, guys, hold on.
Worst poker player ever.
Yeah, that's all right. Ryan's in here arguing with people about Assembly Hall. Why they should
People
tear it
ask what I
down.
mean about
Just
the facilities. I mean,
another night in the Assembly Call.
guys, it's just known that the facilities in Indiana lag behind, and you talk to people around the Big Ten, and they can't believe that that's the case at Indiana. And then
in what
Indiana,
way? In what way did they lag behind?
They're older. They're not, up to snuff with all the bells and whistles that you get at some of these bigger programs.
I get that. I just get tired of that argument because Cook Hall's 11 years old. The locker room's like 3 years old.
The locker room is
Yes,
actually
the stadium.
fine. That's one thing. The locker room is what people talk about. The problem with
But my
Cook Hall,
point is the stadium is going to take 5 or 6 years if you decide to do it right now.
Agreed.
You need to recruit players now, but how often – I hear this with football all the time. How often do you need to rebuild the Cook Hall? Every 3 years, every 4 years to keep up with the stuff?
You need to completely gut it every 5 or so to be –
Okay,
and the other thing –
so you also have coaches coming to us saying we need millions of dollars in NIL money. Like, where's the money going to come from?
NIL doesn't come from the school, though. That comes from outside. Now, I know it's donors, but
are they going to donate to school? I think it's a tired argument. Facilities are a tired argument for not doing your job as a coaching staff.
No, I agree with that.
That's what I'm
Coach,
saying.
I agree with that. I 100% agree that the coaching staff but I'm talking about luring players. And players, especially ones who are only going to be on campus for 1 year, most of their time is going to be spent at the team facility. If they are being pitched a team facility that is brand new and incredible and gorgeous and all of this stuff, and they're going to be spending all their time there, and the workout facility is top-notch and all that, they are more likely to spend it there than at a lower level place. The problem with
you need a good banking system to cash NIL checks to get players on campus.
But there's no reason you can't do both. I don't think it's an either.
I'm just saying. I don't disagree.
If you're a top program,
facilities matter. But if you have to tear down and rebuild every 5 years a practice facility to win,
so I'm not saying
that's
tear it
ridiculous.
Down to the studs, but you need to redo it. Now the problem with Cook Hall, though, from the beginning, because of where they wanted to put it, it's too small. I mean, it has one court that is hemmed in on the sides. The locker rooms, the workout area, all of that is small compared to these lavish facilities you see elsewhere, where they basically build the athletic department around that program. And I think the problem is they've sunk a lot of money into the football program and have very bad results, and that has been to the detriment of the basketball program, in my opinion. And so I'm not saying,
we recruited as a Heisman candidate. Okay. So just cool it.
But I don't think they need to bulldoze Assembly Hall right now. They do need to come up with a succession plan there, though, because that facility is not getting younger. And there are a lot of problems with that facility. I think we would all agree about a third of the seats in there are pretty bad. There's no better big game atmosphere. Don't get me wrong. But on a Tuesday night in January when they're playing Penn State, the balcony is typically empty because the seats up there outside of the first 2 rows stink. And the seats on the sides stink. And it's not designed. It was never designed as a great
now, Ryan,
place to watch
a player's not sitting here, not coming to Indiana because he's in defense of the fans sitting in the balcony. That's just bullshit.
But the atmosphere suffers. Yeah, it's great against Purdue, but the atmosphere suffers, and players notice that. When they come on a visit and they're going to a game in the middle of the week that has a dead vibe in it and they're sitting on the court and looking up at empty seats because those seats are not filled because they're terrible, they notice those things. And people talk about these things as well. So, I think eventually you're going to have to replace that building, and you need to start talking about it now. They already approved replacing it in like 2006 because it was bad then, and they never did it.
Anybody who had a Ryan bingo card tonight has definitely got all their spots
checked
filled.
every single
We
spot.
are playing the hits, man.
You just it's just funny because you just said we sunk money in the football program, and then I got all the football people saying, "Oh, we need new facilities. We need new facilities."
Of course,
baseball team just has a brand new stadium. We need a new facilities.
Would you rather sink money? Which should Indiana?
I need a new facility. I need a new damn recliner. Someone in the chat send me some money for a new recliner, or I'm not going to do next year.
Stop spending so much money on other teams at Home Field Apparel, and you could afford a recliner.
Yeah, seriously.
My ass is sore. Send me a new recliner. 1691 North Highway 421.
Don't give away your address.
Oh, God.
Do not give away your address.
Yeah. They can find it. It doesn't matter.
Jared, you're going to have to dump that.
Shafino! There's going to be people just on Coach's porch just yelling Shafino. The neighbors are going to be wondering what's happening.
No,
I'm just giving you a hard time.
I know. If you look at what other top programs have, if Indiana considers itself a top program, if Indiana wants to compete with North Carolina, Duke, Kansas, whatever, they have to get on that level financially. They just do. I mean, if you don't want to do that and you're fine and you can't, here's what I say. As a university, you cannot not get there financially and then be upset with the outcomes you're having. That's essentially it. You have to treat it like a top program if you want it to be a top program. And I think the university has fallen very far behind in that way over the past 20 years.
Yeah, and where you're right is if the money is there and decisions are going elsewhere when they could be used for facilities, then I would agree with you on upgrading certain things. But we have a tendency at Indiana to make excuses for poor performance. Yeah.
I don't think the things are mutually exclusive. I don't think it's one or the other, Coach. I think there's a lot of poor decision-making going on. The facilities are just a further example of that.
Yeah. I think Ryan's point, if we tie this up, is Indiana basketball hasn't been as good as we've wanted it to be over the last 10 years, and there are a lot of basketball reasons and coaching reasons and player reasons for that. But it is possible that there's a glass ceiling on the program because of some of these facilities issues.
You're hamstringing
if they continue to go over the next 10, 15 years. And I don't buy it all, but I do think he has a point there.
Yeah,
I think to summarize Coach's argument, he thinks Ryan is wrong.
So. I think he's full of shit.
And wants a damn recliner.
And he would also.
I'm trying to get a recliner out of it.
Yeah.
No. He's not off. It's just it's impossible to replace as fast as people need it.
Totally understand. And look, it's never going to be Oregon where there's Nike money running through and they have a new football facility every 3 years with fountains and waterfalls and all of that. I understand that. I'm not looking for that. But I do think you need to continually attempt to keep pace. Whether it's renovating one section every year instead of doing the whole thing, it has to happen. And by the way, people who think I'm wrong, everybody talks about this behind the scenes. This is not
that you're wrong or something different.
No, that this is a problem.
Oh, okay.
People around the Big Ten all talk about they can't believe Indiana has not improved things. I mean, it's people talk about it. It's go to Kansas, go to a game at Kansas and compare it to Indiana. Like the entire athletic department did this year, coming back hanging their head sheepishly because of what they saw.
No, that is
with
true.
the Hall of Fame,
definitely.
the Hall of Fame
that,
stuff
right,
and the
Jared?
memorabilia.
No, that
the Hall of Fame stuff is good, but again, Mgbako's not making a decision on a Hall of Fame.
They're starting to make some changes with certain things. Yes,
he's watching this show to make a decision. And Mackenzie, despite any misgivings we may have about the facilities, we still want you to come. That's how we help improve the facilities. Yeah, Coach will chant your name on his porch when you have a big performance against Purdue.
Yeah.
No, I did hear that, and there have been some changes made already because of
what they saw at Kansas.
Yes, that has definitely happened.
And that's what brought this back up, quite frankly. It was that. But also the fact that people in the athletic department needed that to happen to realize the difference is kind of a red flag. You know, they need to be aware what's going on elsewhere to improve their own program. It's not just about what's going on in your program. You have to look at the bigger picture and see what's going on in college basketball, college sports, and then apply those positives to your program. I hope that they will do that now that they have had that, awakening. But we'll see. And we'll see in their actions over the next couple of years, I guess.
Okay, here we go. Let's get into segment 2.
This is Jordan Halls, and I never miss a shot or an episode of the Assembly Call.
The great Jordan Halls. He's a pretty important day for Indiana's recruiting coordinator, Jordan Halls, tonight and tomorrow. So we wish him and the entire staff good luck. Welcome back to the Assembly Call. I'm Jared Morris here with the full crew, the coach, Brian Tonsoni, Andy Bottoms, Ryan Phillips. Fresh off another 10-minute discussion about Indiana's facilities. Woohoo! Always appreciate those discussions. But now, gentlemen, it is segment 2, and we have some important stuff to talk about, which is the recruitment of Mackenzie Mgbako, a 5-star McDonald's All-American. He's down between Indiana and Kansas. Clearly, if he's making his choice just based on facilities, we know where he's going. Thankfully, it is a much more nuanced decision than that. I thought it was great. Our buddy Lee Butler, who's in our community, posted this in our question thread for today. It's not really a question, but a comment. He says, 2 weeks ago, we did not know about the recruitment of Mgbako. Now everyone is panicked that he might choose Kansas over Indiana. Chill, trust the coach. IU basketball will go on regardless. So that is, I think, a good overview statement for this discussion. It is interesting, Ryan, in this, kind of this new age with the transfer portal and rosters so much in flux and, just so many offseason dominoes, right? It's like Mgbako is committed to Duke. He's going there. Filipowski stays. Mgbako, leaves. And because Indiana didn't get Ledlum and some of these other guys, now we have a spot. So now we're going after Mgbako. Like, it's just the twists and turns of the offseason. You just can't really predict where it's going to go, But ultimately, now Indiana finds itself. They got off to a good start with the portal. We obviously getting Khalil Ware is huge. I mean, he's one. He was one of the prized. One of the jewels of this transfer portal class. You got good depth with Peyton Sparks and Anthony Walker. Now you got to fill these wing spots. And so as you look at this Mgbako recruitment, without handicapping it yet, like, what does this represent to you? How important is it that Indiana gets, Mgbako based on what you know of his game and what Indiana needs?
I'm sorry, was that me? I just got a text from work. I'm sorry.
It was. That was just
Okay.
work. You should act like it's, something basketball related. Give us
It's
some
not
facial
basketball
expressions.
related. Well, it's basketball related,
Something-
but it's work related.
Something the chat mob can grasp onto here.
No, Mgbako, what he does is exactly what Indiana needs. He's a wing scorer who can shoot from beyond the arc. He plays great in the mid-post game when he wants to dive in and get some work done there, that you can move your versatile now big men away from the basket, switch things up, get him on smaller guys. And he's become really good at pick and pop, that kind of stuff. And which is, again, what Indiana's missing is the ability to shoot the ball from long range with a bigger guy, essentially, and somebody who can get that shot off over anybody. I love the way he moves. I think he's gotten better. I think he's in, I think he's become more athletic over time. He's not an off the charts athlete, but he's a good athlete, a good enough athlete. And he's a guy who put the ball in the hoop. And Indiana needs that on the wing right now. It doesn't really seem to have that on the roster unless somebody makes a huge jump this season. So basically, he's what we were asking for. You needed another big man, at least one, and you got that in Ware. You have the two backup guys as well, that have come in Walker and Sparks. But I think that you get the big man in Ware, and the other thing you needed was wing scoring. And I said potentially another ball handler. They're going to roll with what they've got, and that's fine. They probably have a lot of confidence in Gabe Cupps being able to do that, and that's fine. But you needed that wing scorer. And so he fits exactly what you need, which is why it's going to be disappointing if you do get to the final two. You're right. They did great. As you said earlier, they did a great job getting into his final two. But if you don't get him, then you're kind of like, where do we go now for that wing scoring? Because you need to have it. And a versatile wing scorer too, guy who could shoot, guy who can drive and put the ball in the hoop. And his size helps so much. So that's what he offers. And basically he's a perfect fit for what Indiana does. And if he goes to Kansas, it would be, to me, I mean, I get it's a great program. They put guys in the NBA, all that, and they also can contend for a national title next year. But the playing time issue, he won't be showcased the way he will be here at Indiana. So that would be a weird decision for me. I would say from the beginning, I wouldn't think that would have been one of those finalists, but again, it's a great program and they put guys in the NBA, so it's hard to argue.
And the thing is, we don't fully know like what his criteria is. We don't know that for a lot of players, kind of what
Right.
the hierarchy of their criteria is, but especially for this one. I mean, they really wanted to keep things quiet, and they really have. And so, the point I want to make here, and I'll be curious, kind of what you guys have heard and where your feeling is on, just kind of gut feeling on where he's going to go. As I said in the tease before, I think there's reasons to think he's going to go to Kansas, and there's reasons to think it'll be Indiana. Kansas folks are vocally confident about this. They've kind of been talking it up more than anybody else has. It sounds a lot like Indiana people and fans after the Chris Ledlum visit, just to give people kind of a frame of reference. And, there was a lot of confidence from Kansas after his visit there. I'm not sure anything has happened since then to give them more confidence. So I think it's just confidence lingering from there. But there are, and we're not going to get into specifics here. I think on the Indiana side, Indiana has done a really nice job of kind of keeping it quiet, which seems like the wishes of the family. But there have certainly been things that I've heard, I think maybe things that you guys have heard, that suggest this is not a done deal. And that's really kind of the main point that I want to make. Like if if I was forced to place a bet on it, I would probably place the bet on Kansas simply because it's Kansas. And for the most part, they've won these recruitments over us for out-of-state guys. But it's like a 51-49 type thing. Like I really do think some of the things that, at least that I've heard, suggest that, it's either, not decided or Indiana's in a little bit of a better position than other people think. Now, we're all going to find out tomorrow, so it's not like it's that big of a deal, whether we find out right now. But I wouldn't kind of go into tomorrow just thinking that it's already decided or Indiana has no chance. That doesn't really seem to match up. It really does seem like it's a decision that maybe isn't even made yet. So, we just have to wake up and kind of see. Have you guys seen a time for the decision? I haven't seen any time for when it might happen. Or
6.
Oh,
6:15
was that stated?
announcement. I think that's what I read. Yeah.
Okay. So 6:15. So it will be in the evening. So we'll have to see if we get good news. We'll have to see about an emergency pod, because obviously we will want to do one of those. But Andy, as you kind of look at this and approach tomorrow, what is your approach for tomorrow with this recruitment?
I really haven't heard anything, so I'm basing this more just on trying to think it through. It's a little bit hard because you're putting yourself in the guy's shoes. And we texted about this a little bit the other day. It would seem, if the belief is he backed out of the commitment to Duke in large part due to Filipowski coming back and presumably having a smaller role than what he would have expected, then it would seem counterintuitive to then go to Kansas because there's just not as much of a central role available there. And I know you guys I think Ryan, you had said that wasn't maybe the only thing that led him to go away from that. I think that was a factor, but it probably wasn't the only factor. And so, you look at it that way, and Kansas, I think, could not offer him the role in the offense that he would very clearly have at IU. Now, that may or may not be something that he's interested in. There may be enough other factors that maybe the overall team outlook, whatever you want to say, maybe swings him in a different direction. But I think from a role perspective, it's very clear that IU can probably offer him at least the opportunity for things that maybe Kansas cannot. That being said, it's hard to your point, Jared, really bet against Kansas in that scenario, both because of how they've typically done from a recruiting standpoint, just the kind of program it is and the success that they've had on a very, very consistent basis for a long time. And that knowing you're going to be a part of that program, and I think there's an allure to that part of it. I do think from an IU perspective, the allure for him is he's a difference maker. And as you said, there are, the portal closes down here pretty quick, and there aren't a lot of difference makers left. And so I think if you're IU, you have to spin that forward and be able to say, this guy really can elevate where we are. I think you talked about if you put this with the Walker commitment, not a guy who really changes the ceiling, but raises the floor a little bit. Mgbako is a guy who is one of the only guys really left who you think could make a tangible difference in what you think the ceiling is of the team. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't other guys that they go try to get, but you're almost trying to have multiple guys cobbled together to provide what you would think that he would do. And I think that, to me, is the biggest, pendulum swing for IU, simply because he is one of very few difference makers that is left, and one of really the only difference makers that is left that has shown an interest in IU at this point. And some of those guys are big guys who wouldn't show interest for that reason. It's not a commentary on IU's ability to get, some of these guys interested, but there's a few decent big guys out there. Those aren't the guys that IU's going after. So he's really the difference maker that fills the biggest and most clear need on IU's roster. And that's what makes it incredibly important from strictly a basketball perspective.
And here's the other thing I want to say, Coach. And I will preface this by saying, obviously, I want Mgbako. We need Mgbako. He is a difference maker, Andy, to your point. But if he does end up picking Indiana tomorrow, I can promise you that one of the first things I'm going to do, Coach, is kind of try to tap the brakes a little bit on the expectations. Because one of the things that often happens, especially with freshman recruits, is, look, this guy's a McDonald's All-American 5-star. Like, he's got the pedigree. He will come in and be impactful. But we probably need to, I don't know, be a little bit realistic about what that impact is, right? And I'll use two recent examples from the Big Ten, Caleb Houston and Max Christie, who were guys that were similar in terms of, playing on the wing, good shooters, McDonald's All-Americans, top 20-ish type recruits. And both guys were one and dones, so they were good and showed, flashes of potential. But they also had ups and downs. And they were also guys, like you look at their KenPom profile, right? Caleb Houston, for example, overall, his offensive rating 103.4, shot solid from three-point range, 35.5. But in their 25 games against tier A and B competition, his offensive rating was 91. He's still a freshman. And so I just think it's important. You get a guy like that, the expectations all of a sudden run rampant, and you put everything on this guy. This is still going to be a team that X is leading. You're still going to need Kalel Ware to kind of jump up to star level. You need Malik Renew to step up. So Mgbako will get shots. He'll have a featured role in the offense. But I think, he's still a freshman who is probably going to be a little bit inconsistent. The shot, he struggled in the Nike EYBL last year, shot like 25% from three. There's a little bit of an inconsistency there. So I just think it's important to remember this isn't a senior with 4 years of experience that we know exactly what we're getting. It's a super talented young player with the size and the skill set that seems like exactly what Indiana needs, but he's still a guy that I think fans are going to have to be patient with if he does end up coming. And I just think it's important to remember that because we can get so lost. And is he going to come? Is he not? This guy's a difference maker. He's going to make the difference. He can be a very important piece to a really good team. But I just think we need to keep our expectations in check because a lot of times these kinds of players who come in when their outside shooting is their number one skill, a lot of freshmen struggle with the speed of the game and the shot doesn't come right away. And so I just think it's important to put that into context and remember that, but still be excited. I don't want to, talk the guy down. He's still a really good player, but as a freshman, sometimes these guys need some time to adjust.
Yeah, but he's a dude. He's a McDonald's All-American. You have to be excited to get that kind of potential in. But what you're talking about is potential. And some of them come in, the five-star McDonald's All-Americans, and they skyrocket and dominate a team and lead a team. Other teams, as you mentioned, other guys come in and mention have an okay year, skip to the NBA. There is no guarantee. But you should be excited as anything because he's going to play, and he's going to have his opportunities to have good games and bad games because his talent level. It's just the same thing with Ware. Why we should be excited about Ware. He didn't have a great year at Oregon. There's some question marks there, but you get that kind of skill. Now you got two guys with that skill. You got your veteran point guard. It is a huge decision tomorrow because it just makes Indiana a lot better. It's not the end of the world because, as I've said before, we've got some guys coming in. We got CJ Gunn, Caleb Banks, guys that fit that mold of being long and lean and athletic that are going to have to develop if this young man doesn't come. And there are still some transfer portal guys, although it is starting to get to that point to being concerned. But, yeah, I'm going to be excited. And it's just like Hood Schifino. Hood Schifino had some games, and then he had, the Purdue situation. But he's going to be in the NBA. That should be exciting for Indiana fans if he does select Indiana because we don't take a step back and just make the tournament and hope we make the tournament. I think we are still going to then be expectations of being in that 4 through 7 range and have a chance to pop if you get a talent and that potential is reached. But you gotta get your dudes in. And he's one of them. So it'll be a big day if it heads our way. If not, you just got to keep grinding in that portal and get a guy or two to come in and then hope that some guys develop.
No question. It's a huge recruitment. It would increase Indiana's talent. It would increase the ceiling for next season. If you get him, let's say that CJ Gunn starts at the 2. Ryan, your starting lineup is 6'3", 6'6", 6'8", 6'9", 7 foot, which is insane.
That's nice.
And all good athletes too. Yeah. So I mean, don't get me wrong. I want this guy, but college basketball is just different now. It used to be you get a freshman, you start thinking about what this guy can be in his second, third, and fourth season, and really you can only think about it on a year-by-year basis now. Yeah. Because is this guy going to go pro? Transferring is so easy. So what is he going to do now? And all I'm saying is he's not going to be the player next year that he will be as a junior or senior or a second or third year player in the NBA. And it's just important to remember that, if we can start going down that road of setting expectations. Ryan, I know you need to leave soon, so let me give you the last word on this, unless you're good to stay for a while.
What I want to say is I did notice on Twitter and in interactions, everyone saying, well, he won't put up numbers at Kansas because there's a ton of good players. And it's like, guys, college statistics do not matter to the NBA. Showing your potential matters to the NBA. If Jalen Hood-Schifino had put up lower numbers than he did, he'd still be the same guy. And so like if he had split time with X more and not scored as many points or not had as many minutes or whatever, it's the potential you show. They do not care what your numbers are in college. There are some things when they're splitting hairs between guys, they'll be like, well, he has a higher free throw percentage. That means he's probably going to become a better 3-point shooter. Let's see what it looks like on the court. They use it as a guide to help them in their individual evaluations, but that does not matter. Plenty of guys have put up average numbers and been first-round picks after a freshman year. So I think that needs to be understood, that if a kid's just thinking about his future, well, he has playing time here, so he's going to put up numbers and therefore he'll be in the NBA. They don't care. I do think the path to showcasing his ability is far more clear at Indiana than it is at Kansas. That is true. But that might not be the thing that is drawing him to college. You never know. There are positives to Indiana, certainly, in this situation. And quite frankly, if it was me, that's where I would go. That doesn't mean that's what he's going to go, because what he prioritizes is different. And he's never outwardly spoken about what he's prioritizing in his recruitment.
Until they bring you to Assembly Hall for your visit.
And then I'd be like, guys,
not going
here. Guys, you've seen other arenas, right?
Cook Hall has one court?
One court?
Fly me home.
But anyway, no, so we don't know. He's never publicly said, these are the things I'm looking for. A lot of kids don't. They want to keep that kind of a mystery. So we'll see what happens tomorrow. It is great that Indiana got into the final two and put its best foot forward, and we'll see what happens there.
The last thing to talk about here, Andy, is, again, a theme here has been, okay, let's get this guy, but if we don't, on to the next. There are lots of options. There are still some options, but time is running down. I think a lot of people saw, Julian Phillips from Tennessee, who Indiana, I think he was actually the first scholarship offer that Mike Woodson gave. He announced that he is entering the transfer portal. I believe he's also entered his name in the NBA draft, which I think is where a lot of people think he's going to end up going. But he's a potential option. A lot of people have talked about Jordan Dingle from Penn. Certainly Indiana reached out there, but we haven't heard a lot about that. I think his focus is on the NBA, before he starts focusing on things. But, those two guys, because they put their name in, they're in the transfer portal, so they could take until August if they wanted to. They'll still get they don't have to make their decision now. They'll still be able to play next season. Then you got some other guys. There's a kid named Taylor, I think, from Marshall that I saw that Indiana had reached out to. You've got Dennis from Toledo, who I think is on an official visit with Illinois right now and is supposed to take another couple. So these are names that have been talked about. As of yet, I haven't really heard anything that makes me think Indiana has a lot of traction with those guys. Like, there's no official visits scheduled. Haven't heard of, anything beyond just reaching out to contact them. So now is where we're starting, Andy, to get a little bit later in the process. You don't get a guy like Mgbako, your options do start to dwindle. And so that's where I want to exercise a little bit of caution on, hey, if this guy comes to IU, let's pump the brakes a little bit on what we expect. We still really need this guy to come to IU because, we need someone with his talent and size and skill level to fill one of those slots. Because even if he's an inconsistent freshman, he's still an inconsistent dude that is going to have some big games. And if his big game just happens to happen in Mackey Arena, like happened with our freshman last year, all the better. But we need those kinds of guys. So, we're not going to come on here and keep saying, like, there's time. There's not as much time left now. And so Indiana's going to have to start landing one of these guys for us to feel good about what it has on the wing next year.
Yeah, I do think, to your point, there are potential pivots to make if he doesn't come, but I don't think any of those is going to get people excited. Now, again, it goes into the same thing. Lee said this. I think I said this about somebody else before. Everybody's going to get excited about someone they never heard of 2 weeks ago, and then the sky's falling, and then you move on to the next one to get excited about and then decide from there. I do think there are guys. I think Dingle is an interesting one, but it does seem like coming back to college is not the first thing on his list that may end up happening depending upon the feedback he gets and things like that. But kind of like you've heard other guys' names mentioned just as some of the top guys left in the portal, but you haven't heard a whole lot of specifics around IU's true interest in them and vice versa, their interest in IU. So that's kind of where, we've largely taken this, track over the offseason of, until somebody comes and shows up for a visit, it's okay to understand that they're out there and know what they might bring to the table, but it's not really serious until you're getting to that point. So unless you can find ways to get some of these guys on, and maybe you do, and they've admittedly been pretty pointed in their focus on a small number of guys over the course of this process. And so maybe that pays off with Mgbako. And again, like I said, it's not that there aren't players there. There's still tons of players in the portal, but in terms of guys who are really going to make a difference, that you're maybe having to think that guys are going to take leaps that maybe are not realistic or things like that. And you're going to have to take a few guys and just say, hey, I hope one of them pans out. It turns into like a, late round fantasy football draft of, well, I'm going to draft a bunch of running backs and hope that one of them shakes out. I'm going to take a bunch of wing guys and hope that somebody, either a guy that I already have or somebody there flashes. And maybe that works, but you kind of move into that territory. And that's ultimately why, when we talk about him being a difference maker, that's ultimately why that part becomes important, because you're kind of taking flyers to a certain extent on other guys potentially to fill out your roster spots and hoping that one hits.
And Coach, one of the things I love about IU fans, man, is when you come to Indiana as a freshman and you put in time, especially if you're from the state of Indiana, man, Indiana fans love you and embrace you and defend you to no end. And so a lot of times when we or anybody else says something like I said, which is, hey, to feel good about our wings, we need a guy like this, it immediately gets into, well, what about Trey? What about CJ? What about Caleb? And it's like an either or thing. We all have been very clear that we love all those guys. Love Trey for what he's already brought through 3 seasons. Love the potential for CJ and Caleb. But at a certain point, when you're in May in the offseason and you're trying to project forward for what the team is going to be, you start to look at, kind of probabilities. Okay. What can these guys realistically be expected to produce? Trey Galloway in his 3rd season last year played 27.7 minutes and scored 6.7 points a game and was an inconsistent offensive player. You need more than that from a starting wing if you want to be a better team than what Indiana was. CJ and Caleb have all the potential in the world. They were recruited. Their recruiting rankings project them as guys who are more, consistent producers as juniors and seniors, but can take a step as a sophomore. So we all love those guys, but I think we all also understand that we need either more talent or more proven experience. If you can get both, awesome. But if you can only get one, which may be where Indiana is now, you need to at least get that to kind of, to Andy's point, to have a few more lottery tickets for who's going to hit this season. Maybe it's CJ. Maybe CJ comes in, scores 12 points a game, and we're all like, man, remember all those silly offseason conversations we were having when our starting 2 guard was sitting right here all along? And if that happens, it would be awesome. But I don't want it to seem like we're down on any of those guys. I think we're just realistic about their development curves. That's it. And that's where a guy like Mgbako with his size and talent can come in, hopefully relieve some pressure from those guys, but now you've just got more options. And if Mgbako comes and he's having a rough game on the road because he's a freshman, now, maybe Trey steps up and that's one of his games, or CJ's ready to step up and be a little bit more productive than he was last year. So I just want to say that because every comment thread we have about this in the community, people come running to those guys' defense, and I love that. It's what I love about Indiana fans. But I want to make it clear that we believe in those guys too. It's just we're looking at this season, and I think if you're realistic about expected development curves, you can't feel like this is a Big Ten title level or Sweet 16 level backcourt that Indiana has yet. Maybe it gets there, but we just don't have any evidence of that quite yet with what we've seen from these guys.
No, we've said it all off season. You need dudes. You need athletes. You need players. I think that was evident that Indiana had a bunch of good guys, and we really maybe overachieved a little bit. But when you look at that Miami game, we just didn't have the athletes to match up to Miami, and that's just hard to say. So you need a wide variety of the 13 scholarship players. You need to have some ability for injury, for competition, as you say, to maximize the potential and push people to reach their potential. You don't want to go into a year. where you're bringing in two more portal guys, and they're really going to just be behind where CJ and Caleb are. That would not be good. You want at least one to come in and have a pretty good chance to earn. They have to earn in the summer and in the fall, earn a starting spot. But they have proven it. You said a great thing about college experience. No matter where you play, you have some college experience. Indiana needs that on this roster because they lost, seven players that had that experience. So, I just think the toughest thing for me right now is to figure out when Indiana gets back on somewhat of a level playing field with winning. Kansas has won a lot in the last 20 years. The young man's looking at, do I want to go – where do I have a chance if playing and winning is a factor? Mike Woodson's gotten to the tournament for 2 years, but that you have to be honest in saying Kansas has more experience. Self has more experience as a coach. Woodson has a couple of years. There's a lot of those factors that Indiana is just behind right now, and I'm excited for them to level that playing ground up, and that's where Ryan is probably right a little bit in the facilities thing, but. It takes time. I've always said it takes time for Woodson to get into his role with recruiting and all of that. So it's just difficult. But we need two more guys to come in and compete for playing time if we're going to keep moving in the right path of building this program back. If not, we may take a step back, and that's not awful. But man, if we can get the right kind of guys in here, that's what's exciting about what's happening right now.
All right, I got to get out of here, folks. Thank you.
All right, Ryan had to bounce. He is working, so this will now be an Assembly Hall friendly zone for the rest of the show now that Ryan is gone. Look, we got a couple of questions about the recruitment. Let me just see. Maria says, if we don't get Mgbako, where do we stand? I think we kind of covered that. Like, there are some options. Probably the kid from Marshall, I think his name is Andrew Taylor. Like, he probably seems like the most likely of all the guys. And he just tweeted out a list, or John Rothstein tweeted out a list of 20 teams that have reached out. So that's obviously very early. So if we don't get Mgbako, where do we stand? In a very uncertain spot. So we'll have to see what they do. Bob Thompson says, how much overreaction will we see from the fan base if Mgbako chooses Kansas? And I just have to vehemently disagree with the very premise of this question, because Indiana fans are nothing if not always cool, calm, and composed. And so I think we will all handle it very well. Don't you? The silence speaks volumes. Okay.
Sure.
Maybe not. No, look, how much overreaction will we see? I think Indiana fans are pretty good about most of them are pretty good about not being stupid on Twitter, so I don't think we'll see any dumb stuff tweeted at the family, which is good. I think there will be, here's what I think on this one. I think there's going to be some reaction. And I'm not sure a lot of it is going to be overreaction. I think a lot of it is going to be pent up, kind of disappointment about the Ludlam recruitment, about not getting more traction with wings. And I think there's going to be a little bit of kind of fear and uncertainty. And so I think if he does choose Kansas, we will see some strong reactions. Some of it will be overreactions, but I think some of it will actually be more warranted than maybe a month ago because, like we said, the options are fewer. And Indiana still needs to complete this roster. So it doesn't mean they're out of it. But, obviously it's, it'll be difficult if you can't land this guy. I don't know if there's going to be another guy with his talent level that you have a realistic shot with. So let's hope for the best, see what happens. And
I think before you could at least attempt to quell some of those fears by saying, well, there's still time left. Other guys may come. A lot of things happen. And that largely has proven to be the case, Mgbako was not a guy who was on the radar. That situation changed, but you're kind of running out of situations that could change with the portal closing and different things like that. So I think that might be where, whether warranted or not, where I think a lot of the reaction comes from, because now you've kind of got a set picture of here are the options, at least that are known. And all of a sudden I can't tell myself a story that says, oh, here's the guy, here's the next best guy who I could still be almost just as happy with as the other one there.
Yep. Okay, coming up here on Assembly Call Radio, it is mailbag time. So we got a bunch of good questions. We will roll through, we got 5 or 6 of them. Roll through these here next. So stick with us here on the Assembly Call. to run to the restroom real quick. You guys talk amongst yourselves.
We'll do. So, Coach, you're probably single-digit days of school left for you. At this point, right?
I tomorrow I'm off. I got a doctor's appointment, heart thing, checkup, and so Amy and I are gonna head to Bloomington after the morning. Take the day off, so that eliminates a day.
Nice.
I think we're down to 8 student days and 9 total days.
Gotcha. All right, heading to baseball game this weekend, or no?
Yeah, we're gonna go down and have a little bite to eat at Lenny's, and then try to get to the game if the weather holds out. It's supposed to rain all weekend, so maybe they can find a little bit of a window there and
enough daylight to play.
Yep. So, yeah, exciting time.
Wow,
your kids and everyone, they got to be close too,
we
right?
still got a couple. They got a couple weeks. They're done right before Memorial
okay.
Day, so got a little bit. I'm not sure anybody's doing a whole lot of anything. Although one will have exams, so I guess she'll have stuff to do. But I'm not convinced there's a whole lot going on for the other one. But that's just the jealousy talking. It's not really even. It's not really. I'm not going to cast aspersions on them by any means.
All right, you guys ready to roll through these questions?
Yep.
Let's do this.
How is your use of your facilities?
Great.
Great.
Excellent.
Yep. Excellent.
Well, now I can,
making
now I
sure
can
everything
focus.
was okay down there in the south.
Everything is good. All right,
right.
here we go.
What's up, y'all? It's Devontae Green giving you the green light to watch Assembly Call after every IU game. Just don't listen to their opinions about shot selection. Remember, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Go Hoosiers.
Thank you, Devontae, and congratulations to Devontae Green, who I believe, if I saw correctly, was named MVP of the league that he is playing in. He's been doing very, very well, so we congratulate Devontae. I'm Jared Morris, here with Andy Bottoms and the coach Brian Tonsoni. Ryan had to bounce off. But we are going to roll through our mailbag questions. All of these questions submitted via our private IU basketball discussion community. You can join us anytime over there at assemblycall.com/community. Had a guy, Mark, earlier today. We were trying to work through an account issue. He was struggling to get in, eventually got in. And he followed up and said, it's the best IU community out there. Love being a part of it. And so we appreciate those kind words from Mark, and we would love to have you join us there too. assemblycall.com/community. All right, guys, let's roll through these. From Kara, just curious, anyone know how Rob Finnessy and Christian Lander did at their respective transfer schools this past season? So Christian was at Western Kentucky. I don't believe he did much. I remember checking in on him mid-season. His stats.
Yeah, I
were not very good.
I got the stats pulled up for both of them since I saw
All
the
right.
question. So,
Give it to us.
yeah, kind of similar story. You know, Lander played in 33 games, so I think that's pretty much every game they would have played. I'm gonna, give or take one. Only averaged 11 minutes a game, 3.2 points. Did shoot 38.5% from three. But yeah, definitely did not have a major impact for them. And Finnessy had injuries, which has been unfortunately a hallmark of his career. So he only was able to play in 12 games for UC and only averaged 1.7 points. But I think played early in the season. I don't have a game log in front of me, but was a lot of just the injury. I forget what the injury was. I was kind of following at least because it was it was local. But yeah, he played. I guess he played the first set of games. Was off for about 2 months. Came back and played a few more games. End of January, beginning of February, and then was out the rest of the season. So. Kind of not the way he wanted things to end, and with something that had plagued him even during his IU career for sure.
Boy, and that really kind of seems like a random question to ask, and yet when you think about it, within the context of what we just talked about, with needing to get better at the backcourt and needing more guys who can score, you think about those two recruitments. I think they're great kids. We're rooting for them a ton. I don't, who knows the reasons why it didn't work out. But you think back to how excited we were when they committed. and the promise that they had. And with Rob, even how good he was through the first 10 games of his freshman season. And ultimately, I mean, I think you could kind of say that both of their careers took pretty much the worst case scenario. I mean, Rob had some big moments, the win over Purdue and how he played early on, but just couldn't really get healthy. I don't think anybody, when he committed, would have been happy with the projection of him as the backup point guard as a junior, which is what he was at Indiana. And that's where you get these guys, one a 4-star, one a 5-star. You got to hit on those recruitments in your backcourt guys, or develop other guys. And they really are a cautionary tale, and I think still a lingering reason for why this program is struggling, because they just haven't recruited guards very well. So, I mean, obviously last year you get Jalen, you have X. That's obviously starting to turn around, but these are still two relatively recent guys that had really strong pedigrees that just really could never find their footing in college. It's important to remember that can happen sometimes.
I would say that Rob had an okay career. He was probably more of a backup from the start. I know he was a 4-star, and that Lander was the one who came in that was just going to be the difference maker, and really has struggled at the college level. And then Rob's injuries, I think, really set him back, and then he became passive after his injuries, and I think that really hurt his play. But I think at best he was probably a backup point guard to come in and run the show with the second unit, play some defense, be a defensive stopper. And at times he played above that early, which then we expected that going forward, and he kind of just leveled out. So I don't look at that as kind of disappointing or just a downward spiral, but Lander was. And what you get, guys, sometimes with AAU is you get that free playing AAU, and you're playing with a bunch of all-stars, and it's an all-star game. And everyone watching, fans, recruiting analysts, coaches see, wow, this is great. Then you get into the grind of basketball, scouting reports, extra work, knowing, getting out there and being scouted by some of the best coaches in the country. And it's a lot different than the AAU circuit. And if your natural talent can't overcome some deficiencies of playing, then you're going to struggle, even if you're a 5-star. And that's where your comment about being patient with freshmen is very important. You see some big names go to Duke, North Carolina, Kansas, and they kind of, they don't pan out, because when they get – Imani Bates is a great example. Goes to Memphis and just was not – he was the best player, going to be the next, big thing in the NBA.
Next Kevin Durant is what people were calling him.
Yeah, and yes, he played well at Eastern Michigan, but the question is he going to – he'll play in the pros, but he's not going to be what everyone thought, because he wasn't ready for the mental, physical, the basketball IQ that goes on at high-level college programs, because it was just so easy for him in AAU. So you got those 4-stars, 5-stars that you do need your dudes. You got to take chances on them, but sometimes they're not really 4-stars and not really 5-stars. They just looked like it during an AAU season.
Well, and I think the other thing with Lander is the whole reclassification aspect. I know we talked about that when he committed, that the track record of guards in particular who have done that, it was not really very good. No. And you couldn't point to a ton of success stories. And I think that really elevates the things that you talked about, Coach, with like the mental part of it, and really having to face adversity for one of the first times from a basketball perspective, and maybe not being equipped to do that from an age standpoint. I think it really puts a lot of onus on the programs themselves. This is to what support system do you have around a guy like that? And I don't think that, I don't think that the support system he needed was not there. And then for him, you face that adversity, things don't work out. You think that going down a level, but is he just, kind of lost from a confidence standpoint to even be able to step down to a Conference USA school and be able to step in and do some things there? His career is far from over as you look at things like that, but it does kind of spiral. It seems like it spiraled quickly for him from that standpoint, and because then he still wasn't able to rebound a year ago, which is hard, and you kind of wonder what the trajectory of that looked like. Not if he didn't go to IU or whatever, but if you played your senior year of high school and did those things and stepped in a year older to a major college basketball program, like what would that be? Maybe it's no different at all. You just don't know, but it is one of those things that may have had also played a factor in some of his struggles.
By the way, I know we got a couple people in here where, like Mike says, surprise Cups isn't mentioned more. I think he is a big key for next year. Someone agreed with that. We all love Gabe Cupps. I think Gabe Cupps, I think the staff expects him to play minutes next season. But these two examples are exactly why we're trying to be patient with a guy like Gabe Cupps, who has a lot of skills and did a lot in high school, but was still a guy who was a sub 100 recruit. We're talking about a Rob Finney who was, I think, right around 100. Christian Lander, who was a 5-star, 4-star guy. It's hard for some of these guys. And so I think even with Gabe Cupps, who Indiana fans are understandably excited about, you still have to be patient with those guys, and understand it's going to take a little while, and they may not always hit the ground running. Some will, some won't. But just let each guy kind of run their own race, and let's be careful about what expectations we place on them as fans. Jeremy says, after we win our next title, will the Sunday newsletter be called 7 Banner Sunday? You better believe it. The very next one, immediately following the national championship victory, we will immediately switch it to 7 Banner Sunday. I cannot tell you how excited I am to change all those graphics. I will stay up late and do it, just so that we can have that. Jared asked a question about the schedule. We kind of talked about that already. Jeff says, between TJD and Jalen Hood-Schifino, we had 2 players who emerged to be that alpha player that could carry the team. Who is that player for next year's squad? Andy. X is the obvious answer. He better be the answer. I think just his natural personality, like he's just that guy, and he would have been that guy last year. Is there anyone else that you can see kind of stepping up and taking on that type of role alongside X?
I think we had a similar question to this a week or two ago, and I feel like the consensus answer tended to be Trey, just from a personality standpoint. You don't have a lot of returning guys. I think potential dark horse in that scenario was a guy like Renew, if I remember correctly, what we talked about then, a guy who's going to play an integral role, will get a little more confident, was able to learn from Trace for a year and things like that. So those feel like X is the clear answer, but I think those would be the 2 of the returning players who you would think could maybe step into those shoes based on their role on the team, and maybe a bit of their personality. And, for new guys, and I think we said this before, so at least hopefully we're being consistent. I think it's a lot to ask of new guys to come in and do that. So no matter what Ware is, he's a young guy who experienced some struggles last year. Is that really what you want him to do, to be kind of thrust into more of a leadership role? Probably not. Maybe a Peyton Sparks who's been, around a couple years, but is new to the program. That feels like a difficult position. So I tended to lean more toward who of the returning players would it be, and those were the 3 that came to mind first.
All right, let's hit up a couple. Oh yeah, go ahead, Coach.
I'm just interested to see where Renew goes. He's obviously got to make sure that he stays on the floor and those kinds of things, the foul trouble and everything. But he was not hesitant to score in the post and play as a college freshman. He has that body that is needed, and so I'm really interested to see if he doesn't become that. As Andy said, Trey, I think we talked to his leadership role too. I think the question might have been asked Andy when we were on, but I think Malik has a little bit of that attitude in him too. Like I'm going to get things done. I mean, we maybe did not see a lot of that as a freshman year because he was going through that freshman, learning. So I'm interested to see if he becomes that second guy to X in that role.
Andy, I know you have to bounce. We got a couple questions about the schedule, so let me just kind of combine them into one that you two can hit. Basically, with the rest of the games that Indiana has left to schedule in the non-conference, what do you think would be the ideal way for them to schedule those games, taking into account strength of schedule, impact on the net, also just needing to actually win games and needing opportunities to get your young guys in? Like, to you, factoring in all that stuff, how would you like to see the rest of the schedule filled out?
I think that I guess probably what I would like and what I think will happen are probably 2 different things. I think I would probably prefer to get one more, maybe not marquee game, but game against another major conference opponent, even if that's on a neutral floor, as you look at it that way. I think that, they've got presumably the 4 games that will be meaningful this year. Now, if you draw Louisville for one of your Empire Classic games, I don't know that you can expect them to be, while they'll probably be better than last year, if for no other reason than they almost can't be worse. But that's a game that being on a neutral court probably doesn't do a lot for you. So, and I don't know when those get determined who you play in that scenario or not, but personally would rather have another one of those better games, so you kind of guarantee yourself 4 big games and things like that. I am inclined to think they will not do that, just because it is going to be a heavily turned over roster with a lot of questions, and you probably want to find ways to get your wins. And it seems like the pattern they've used so far is, I'm still going to schedule to get wins, but do I think I can still get the wins against maybe a little bit tougher teams than what they played in the past? I think that's a good model. I think you will see a couple games against teams from, low level conferences. So, the SWAC, the Southland, the MEAC, maybe the NEC, something like that. Those are typically like some of your perennially lowest rated conferences. I think you will probably see a couple games against teams like that. But in general, I think particularly if they don't go out and schedule another big game, like, can you find a MAC school to play? Can you find some of those ones from leagues that are at least a little bit middle of the road, team that maybe has a chance to be top 100 that you still think you can beat? I do think they're going to skew more toward how do we win games, because I think that probably for the makeup of this particular team is going to be important. Probably a little bit similar to Woodson's first year, where I think they took that tact maybe a bit more than what they did a year ago. But I do, like I said before, I like what they've done, because I think it's a lot of games that don't set up to hurt you. But I do think you could use another one that maybe sets up to help you. And so now you're trying to fill the void left by no more Big Ten ACC Challenge. IU, I think, is not going to, or it would be unlikely to play in the Gavitt games based on kind of the commitments that have made there and the fact that not every school plays in it. So those two potential routes to getting games like that are not there for you. What can you get? Can you get a Missouri Valley school? Can you get could you get a Mountain West school even that maybe gives you something to, that's a little bit better of a game? So those would be things I'd like to see. I don't know what you will see. I think you're going to have a couple clear cupcakes to be had for sure, but that's at least my initial thoughts.
Coach, anything else to add to that?
I think there's just two. I agree with everything Andy said. There's two scheduling decisions that are huge. One is get another big school because of the Louisville potential situation. I think I've always thought 5 Power 5 and then 6 others. And of those others, you might want to go 3 that are somewhat competitive and 3 that you can get film because they press, they zone. You're going to beat them even if you play bad. So I think, does the Empire count towards the 11? I think you only get 11 non-conference, right? So there's 2 games there.
You'd have 2 of those, yeah.
Yeah, so those both count. So you're sitting at 7 games scheduled. So you have, get 2 games you can win, get on film, get another game like a Harvard, Wright State, and then go get yourself another neutral court game or something that is a challenge. And even in a year where you're mixing players together and you might want to go a little bit light on your schedule, I still think at the end that gets you ready for conference play, and it helps your position to get in the tournament and get a seed as opposed to doing elsewhere. So I think for me it comes down to what Andy's saying is 2 decisions and then fill in wherever you can grab someone.
All right, Andy, thank you.
Yep,
have a good
appreciate
night
it.
and a good weekend.
Good night, Andy.
We'll talk to you
Sounds
soon.
good. Talk to you guys later.
Coach, I got time for probably one more here. And we got a
Sure.
good question from Kevin. He says, I know we always want to win now, and that wing is a major need regardless, and I believe we will use one of our remaining slots for a wing. As for a shooting guard, are we concerned at all about blocking younger talent from blossoming, like CJ Gunn or Ja'Kai Newton, if we were to bring in a decent but not great veteran guard? How much does the raising of the floor compete with the potential lowering of the ceiling by not giving our young guards room to grow? It's a great question, and I think it is it's not really – I don't think it's been something that the coaches have necessarily had to think about yet, because all of the guys that they've gone after have been clear upgrades, right? You've either got a high school recruit who is a 5-star guy where you're like, okay, this guy's great, or you've got, kind of a proven guy who's done it at the college level for 3 or 4 years. And so all the guys that we've been looking at, all the guys that we've had on campus for official visits, it's been a clear upgrade. If you don't get Mgbako, and even if you do get Mgbako and you still have that one slot left, now I think that decision is going to be interesting. So take, for example, this kid from Marshall, Taylor. I haven't really watched him very much. His stats look pretty good. He's got some experience. It seems like he would be an upgrade. But that is where I think the staff would, they have to make sure that they're going through, okay, we can bring this guy in and give him minutes. Is he going to be so much better than what, CJ or Jakai or someone else could be, where it makes sense to not allow them to get that time for development? And so, there's no like perfect way to say, okay, you need a guy who has done this to believe in him. You don't, but this is where the coaches have to say, really have to use their judgment to say, okay, if we're going to bring someone in, assuming that they're going to play over the guys that we already have, we have to know that they're going to give us a lot this year to make that worth it. Because if not, if your options just aren't that great, and it's like, all right, this guy scored 12 points a game in the MAC, he's a junior, like he probably would be an upgrade, but if you're only lukewarm about it, maybe you should give your young guys some run. So there's not a perfect answer there, but this is where coaches earn their money, is having to make these decisions. And I do think it hasn't been something that we've had to worry about much through the first 5-6 weeks of the offseason. I do think now, once we get past the Mgbako recruitment, especially if he says no and you still have 2 more slots to fill, I think that's going to be, a real challenge for the staff to make sure that someone that they bring in is a definite upgrade over a young guy that they and we obviously believe in.
Yeah, the transfer portal changes everything because you can go more year to year now. Because even if you have a younger player who you believe in, but all of a sudden you recruit over or you transfer portal over and he's not happy and he leaves at the end of the next year, you always got that transfer portal. I'm appreciative of the transfer portal for young men being able to choose where they go, but it is one of the negatives of the transfer portal that it does become year by year roster building as opposed to the old 4-year, we want to bring a freshman in. You have those guys. You have to communicate in your recruiting to get those guys. And it goes back to what I thought Coach Woodson's best thing is communicating. He's bringing, the 2 post players in as backup players. He's probably honest saying this is where you're going to be to bring them in. Well, you do have 2 guys who I think are going to be very good Indiana players at some point, and you do need to consider their development. And if you just bring players in to play and they sit for a second year, you're probably going to lose them. And unfortunately, that's part of the decision-making now, because you do need to win now and keep winning now in the college game because it's so competitive. And the transfer portal, every team is 1 year away from, making 2 or 3 really good choices, and it pops from moving from 13th in a division up to 7th and snagging that spot a year. So, the key word for me, Jared, is competition. If you're going to bring in someone that's on a level, you have to talk to your returning players and that transfer portal person, say you are going to compete for minutes and not promise everyone you bring in you're going to get this minutes over. You can't say I am focusing on the transfer guys and I'm not remembering our guys that we brought in as recruits, because then that word gets out and you're not going to be able to bring in any recruits and you're going to have to live through the transfer portal. Musselman does a little bit of that. He's starting to get some recruits, but it is a fine line and a tough job in college now to decide what that roster is going to look like, where is it going to come from, and who you're going to recruit over. And the key thing is communicate and compete. And if you're fair as a coach and you give someone who's playing better in practice that time, I mean, you see it in college basketball where a guy comes in, you think they're going to play minutes, and they had 17 points at a smaller school. They come in, and younger guys beat them out. Good coaches will allow that to happen. So I think that's something just to keep an eye on as this transfer portal keeps growing, I guess.
Saw someone just posted, I'm just watching Jared hoping for a terrible poker face moment. Nope. No texts or DMs during this show. We will wait, like everybody else, to see tomorrow. Like I said, I mean, I think there's a lot of reasons on both sides to feel confident. And if you're looking at all the Kansas confidence and you're like, boy, they seem like really confident. just remember that's kind of how they've been for 7 to 10 days, and things may have changed in the time since Kansas developed all their confidence, which is something that we had happen to us recently. So I say all that to say I don't think anybody who – what's the best way to put this? Among the people that I've talked to, the people who would actually know don't know. So I don't put a whole lot of stock into what some of these other people say who I don't really have any history or track record with. And so we will just wait and see what happens tomorrow. Obviously, if we get good news from an Indiana perspective, then we will do everything that we can to have an emergency podcast as soon after the announcement as possible. So stay tuned in the community on Twitter for that. We'll announce the details of that. But otherwise, that is it. That's going to do it for us on this edition of the Assembly Call. If you ever want to see us do the show live, you can join us at assemblycall.com on Thursday nights for the live broadcast of our Assembly Call radio recording. Thank you, as always, to Bob Thompson for producing our music and to John Ringer of rigdesign.com for designing our logos. And thank you for listening, and to all the people who were here live. We appreciate it. We'll be back to talk IU basketball hopefully tomorrow, but definitely next Thursday. Until then.
Take it from me, Thomas Bryant. Keep your elbows in and your eyes on the rim. Go Hoosiers.
Thank you. Thanks for coming out.
Here I come, Mrs. Stansoni.
All right. Let's see what happens. What happens.
I will probably be available. I'll be at the IU baseball game. I'll bring my earbuds and try to find a spot or go back out to the car if something pops, if I can. It might rain, so.
It might.
Who knows?
Okay. Well, we'll be ready. Do what we have to do. Hopefully we get some good news. Hopefully. All right, Coach. Good seeing you, as always.
Remember, send either money or the U-Haul with the recliner to Delphi.
That's right.
I got to upgrade my facilities.
That's right. You got to upgrade. Hey, you're going to lose.
It's been 16 years since I've upgraded this facility.
Coach, can you imagine trying to recruit new people into Delphi bracketology with these when was the last time you upgraded your facilities? Like 4 or 5 years ago when you started it? I mean, come on.
Yeah.
You got to upgrade so you can get better talent in there and get better brackets to beat bottoms.
Exactly. So
come on.
I'm working with some guys on a new league, a new bracketology league.
A new bracketology league, really?
National thing. We're working on the foundations of the decision to get some of the veteran guys into a league or a consortium or something where it's one place and a new scoring system, and we're in the works
from the Matrix, you mean?
From the Matrix, yeah.
Okay.
Still participate in the Matrix, but offer a little different scoring system and some other things. So we're just in the very beginning, 2 or 3 Zoom calls and
there have been Zoom calls. Any official visits? Because that's when we
no
start taking
official
it seriously.
visits.
Okay.
Website, got a call with the website designer on Friday. So
okay,
yeah,
this is getting serious.
Yeah, so
nice.
Maybe then if I get some cash, I can get a different color recliner or something. I get what Ryan's saying, but man, it just where's all this money going to come from, man? For NIL and facilities every 5 years, and
I know, man. I know it's a lot of money.
I'm just trying to get some money to go to Lenny's tomorrow.
Well, enjoy it. Enjoy Bloomington. I'm always jealous of you when I hear that you're going down to Bloomington.
Yeah.
Have fun.
I
Tell
will.
Mrs. T that we
Thank
said
you.
hello.
All righty.
And cheer that baseball team on.
Will do.
All right, y'all.
We'll see you.
Talk to you soon. Maybe very soon.